So Abby Martin, she has been to Gaza. She has a documentary about the Palestinian struggle in Gaza. You can watch it on Means TV last time I checked. But Abby Martin is going to explain to you what the real goal is here. She's going to tell you why they're targeting journalists. I'm going to tell you why they're targeting other institutions and why they're targeting the children after this. But listen to Abby explain to you why they are attacking journalists in Gaza. And then we're going to go back 2 years ago and we're going to look at the warnings that Abby Martin tried to give to people back then. Again, this did not start October 7th. This has been a problem for a long time. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here. American journalist Abby Martin explains why Israel is targeting journalists. Listen to this.
All the journalists that they're killing, targeting, who else can get away with this? Who else can do this with impunity? They're killing the truth. And that even came out, like I think in a Politico article, it said Biden and his cohorts were scared that journalists were going to get in and show the complete devastation and ruin in Gaza during the truce, and that might shape American minds, Brian. That's what they're scared of. They're scared of Americans turning against this colonial genocidal project because they don't want us to see the truth. That's why they're systematically taking out the journalists. They want everyone to die. They don't want any semblance of civic society left. That's why they're taking out all the best and brightest in Gaza, all the staff of the hospitals. I just saw a video today of NICU babies that were left to die from Israeli soldiers that were invading the hospital. Who does that? Who, with any shred of humanity, can see babies laying helpless and leave them to die? That is what's going on. And they don't want us to see this. And that's why the disgusting appendages of US empire, these so-called journalists that are essentially just stenographers for the Israeli media, can just go up there and just repeat lies. How dare they call themselves journalists? How dare they? How could you be a journalist and not, with every fiber of your being, speak out against this country, this government that is taking out your colleagues? How could they do that?
So they're killing the journalist because they want to kill the source of information. So what do you do first? You take out the journalist. They don't want the information to continue to get out. Had it not been for those journalists in Gaza, will we have the video footage of the children being pulled from the rubble? If it weren't for those journalists in Gaza, that's why you get. So the first thing, again, with the propaganda machine, you kill the source of information. So that's why they're killing the journalists. Now, in reference to the children in the hospitals and the schools, what else do you do? If you are trying to destroy the culture, you have to erase the institutions that allow the culture to exist in the first place. Number one, the schools. You kill the source of education. No schools, no education. Next, the hospitals. You kill the hospitals, you kill the source of health and medicine. The doctors, gone. It's not just about the children that were killed in the hospital. If you destroy all these hospitals, where are all the Palestinian people supposed to go if they're sick from disease, from the dirty water? If they're injured because of the acts of war, because of the airstrikes, where are they supposed to go for treatment? How are they supposed to get surgical procedures done if you don't have the hospital, you don't have the medical equipment? So you take away the health line, education, health. Now we're going to move forward to the children. Why the children? You killed the children to destroy the future lifeline. That's destroying the next generation. This is no different from, if you think about, look at other genocides that have happened throughout the world. Look at the Armenian genocide. How many Armenian people do you know? By the way, it took a long time for the US government to finally acknowledge the Armenian genocide. Joe Biden acknowledged that. I think it was his first year in office, but the first time it was acknowledged was under Donald Trump, his presidency. That was decades ago. They finally acknowledged that it was real. This is what you do. You kill the education. You destroy the health line. You destroy the next generation. And last but not least, you destroy the journalists, which means you kill the form of information. So that the only information and the only propaganda that is released is the one that they want you to see. That's how you take a culture down. 2 years ago, Abby Martin tried to warn people about what was happening there. 2 years ago, the very first time I talked about Israel and Gaza on this show was almost 3 years ago. It's crazy it's been that long. Almost 3 years ago, it was a story of a 10-year-old girl who was standing in rubble because her entire residential building was bombed. And she said, what am I supposed to do? How can we live like this? I'm just a kid. So for some people, they're just now hearing about this because of October 7th. I talked to friends of mine that had no idea what was happening to people in the West Bank, had no idea what was happening to the Palestinians in Gaza. The first time they even heard about it was October 7th. But independent journalists have been covering this for years. Norm Finkelstein has been researching this and has been there in person for a decade. 2 years ago, Abby Martin tried to warn people then. Listen to this.
As shocking as what's happening in Palestine right now is, it's really nothing new. This week, we've seen Palestinians get kicked out of their homes at gunpoint, tear gassed, shot and killed, arrested for absolutely no reason, and now Gaza is being bombed by the IDF relentlessly. But it's also important to remember that the Palestinians have been experiencing these things on a daily basis for the last 73 years. So to understand the true weight behind the spike in Israeli terrorism, we have to first understand the historical context, which...
Pause for a second. Listen to what he just said, and let me know if this sounds familiar.
As shocking as what's happening in Palestine right now is, it's really nothing new. This week, we've seen Palestinians get kicked out of their homes at gunpoint, tear gassed, shot and killed, arrested for absolutely no reason, and now Gaza is being bombed by the IDF relentlessly. But it's...
That was 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Let's bring in Abby Martin here.
Palestine. Abby, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So in the past week or so, the issue of Palestine has basically become the talk of the world. And, you know, there was this whole issue in Sheikh Jarrah, and then we saw the Israeli troops start firing into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And now, just a week later, Israel is collapsing. They're bombing buildings in Gaza. I mean, can you give us an overview of how we got here?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when you're looking at corporate media, of course, it always starts with the rockets and then, of course, the unequivocal declaration that Israel has the right to self-defense. You absolutely never hear about what precedes such rockets. And you absolutely never hear about the context, the overall analysis of, you know, the historical context that preceded all of this, right? And that continues to be ongoing. As you mentioned, Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, mobs of extremist settlers that are armed, mind you, have been expelling Palestinians out of their homes that they've had for generations in this neighborhood. We've all seen the videos. They are very harrowing and horrifying. People being thrown out of their homes by force, all of their material objects being thrown violently out of their homes. You have settlers who are obviously from America in the yards of Palestinians saying, if I don't take this home, someone else will. so I have to take it. This neighborhood has been under assault for quite some time. These settlers have just been waiting for what they deem as a mandate from the Israeli courts that they've been fighting for decades to try to seize and expel these Palestinians from East Jerusalem. Now, I think the important context to this also is that East Jerusalem, just like the West Bank, is under brutal Israeli martial law. Military law forbids Palestinians from protesting, convening in groups of 10 or more, raising a Palestinian flag. All of these things are illegal under martial law.
So do you hear some of these things? These are the things that when you hear people like RFK Jr. say, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, that's an AIPAC talking point, you guys. When you follow the propaganda machine, they're all saying the same thing. It's the same words. Listen to what Abby Martin is telling you. You can't even raise a Palestinian flag.
And so it is very brave that Palestinians are protesting, let alone resisting in the ways that we're seeing now. So, of course, Sheikh Jarrah was violently mobbed by these settlers, thousands strong, chanting death to Arabs and burn their memories.
Yep.
Palestinians peacefully resisted these mobs of violent settler attacks. And of course, soldiers showed up to brutalize them and violently suppress the protests. And of course, all the Israeli soldiers stand on the side of the settlers.
Now, why is that rhetoric okay, according to Congress, according to people like Bill Ackman, according to AIPAC? Why is it okay for the state of Israel or for the settlers? Why is it okay for them to say those words to the Palestinian people who are already there, living in their home, minding their own damn business? Why is it okay to say things like death to Arabs? Why is it okay for them to say that? But the Palestinian people can't say from the river to the sea.
Now then you have worshippers, hundreds of worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is the third holiest site in Islam, stationed in Jerusalem, praying during Ramadan. And then you had IDF soldiers storm the mosque, launch stun grenades and smoke bombs inside, tear gas as well, inside of the mosque, sent hundreds of worshippers to the hospital. This is a war crime, right? This is a war crime that what they did was actually tear gas and launch smoke bombs inside of the hospital after the worshippers were sent there. And then you saw harrowing footage of thousands of extremist settlers chanting, burn their memory again, erase their names outside of the burning Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is a mosque that is ancient. It's 100 years older than the Notre Dame Cathedral. All of the historians were in mass uproar when the Notre Dame Cathedral was burning, and there is quite deafening silence over the intentional burning and attacks on this ancient compound. So all of this preceded the rocket attacks. Hamas, the governing force in Gaza, of course, issued a statement saying, we will retaliate if these attacks continue. And I think Israel made a miscalculation here. I think that they thought that they could violently expel these Palestinians and commit this ethnic cleansing with zero retaliation. And that was a miscalculation on their part because, of course, we saw the rockets fired in response. And Israel, like it always does, issues a wildly disproportionate response, demolishing entire homes with sleeping families inside.
And the other thing, and I'll comment about that in just a second, but notice what Abby Martin just told you. All of those events she just laid out for you, all of those things happened prior to the rockets that were launched. When mainstream media tells these stories, again, they're part of that propaganda machine. When they tell these stories, they leave that part out on purpose. And they start with Hamas sent rockets. They leave all that other stuff that Abby just told you happened prior to that. They leave that out. Again, that is on purpose. This is how they manufacture consent. And you think you're getting the real story. If you only watch mainstream media, you can sit there and believe it like, oh man, this is crazy. They just started attacking Israelis like that for no reason. Oh God. Not understanding what happened prior to. Now, I don't wish death upon anyone. And I don't like violence. But it's important that you know the full story, and people aren't getting the full story. Now, this piece where she said here towards the end, I just want to make sure
There's a wildly disproportionate response, demolishing entire homes with sleeping families inside.
That part right there, depending on what type of permit that is attached to your area, you may get a notification that they're coming to kick you out of your house, or you may not. So Miko Palet talked about this in person when I saw him at MIT. You'll see that video later on this week. He said some people will get a notification and they're like, you got 5 minutes to gather your stuff and get out. Some people don't receive a notification. They could come at any time. They could come in the middle of the night while you're asleep. How is that okay? So you see, all this focus that US Congress and that mainstream media has right now, having you focusing on which phrases are okay to use and all this stuff. By the way, you never see them do this with Black people. You never see them go to this extreme lengths to make sure that Black people are safe and protected in this goddamn country, okay? Let's talk about that. You never see them do this. Never. Because there's nothing in it for them if they do that. They don't get anything out of us. You hear me? They don't get anything out of us. We have no power. Organizations like AIPAC do. So now mainstream media is trying to shift your focus. They want you to pay attention to phrases so that you're not paying attention to all the videos on social media coming across your way of these kids being pulled out from underneath the rubble. People being kicked out of their homes, violently kicked out of their homes in the West Bank right now. This has been happening for years. They don't want you to pay attention to that. So they had to, let's put their attention on something else. But it doesn't seem to be working.
With sleeping families inside. And I just want to pose to viewers just this analogy, because I think it's really a stark analogy. Imagine a mob of armed Muslim extremists storming an ancient synagogue, chanting death to Jews. How do you think the media would respond to that? Or how about this? Imagine, let's say, a mob of Trump supporters that all were armed with weapons in an immigrant community in Texas, storming through the immigrant community, seizing people's homes and occupying them, violently throwing out the immigrants on the street. I can't imagine how liberal media would cover such a situation. So it really just shows you the extreme hypocrisy when it comes to media coverage of what's happening in occupied Palestine.
Yeah, you know, and speaking of double standards, I mean, Palestinian activists have been told forever that Israel isn't a racist country, its existence and its history isn't based on the hatred of Arabs, and that it's actually a super progressive country, and that it's the only democracy in the Middle East, so-called, that they respect LGBT rights and so on. But this totally clashes with what we're actually seeing and what you're describing just now. And, you know, you're also seeing people, Israelis, who are saying, oh, well, this is just, you know, the work of some extremists. They're dismissing it as extremism. But it really seems like this sentiment is mainstream in Israel. What do you think all of this that's happened in the last week, what do you think this really says about the political climate in Israel, and how widespread are these views?
So think about what he just said. Again, he brought up that talking point, the only real democracy, right? Again, I'm telling you guys, that's an AIPAC talking point. That's why all of them say it. That's why AIPAC says it. That's why other politicians say it. That's why RK Jr. says it. It's like all these people went to the same convention, right? Doesn't seem that way. If you pay attention, you notice they're all saying the same thing. Nothing original of their own. Think about that.
I don't know many democracies that actually forbids 5 million residents, that it controls, you know, every aspect of their lives, prevents any sort of democracy for those 5 million residents, 3 million in the West Bank, 2 million in Gaza. So yeah, I wouldn't call Israel democracy, but it is interesting also that they've been able to run with the narrative that they are LGBTQ friendly, and that they're this egalitarian place that welcomes, all religions to have a place there. I mean, look, with its foundation, Israel is a settler colonial state. It was founded, of course, in the immediate aftermath of World War II. And right after the foundation of Israel came the Nakba, which was the horrific ethnic cleansing that expelled almost 1 million Palestinians from their homes, razed 500 Arab villages. Those who didn't leave their homes were killed.
Did you guys hear that? Those who didn't leave their homes were killed. Like, did you learn about this in history class? Why isn't this in your history textbooks? Slavery's in there, right? And even with slavery, they leave a lot of things out. Think about it, guys. This is what they don't want you to know. But it's important that you understand and know the history. And when we talk about the whole issue with ethnic cleansing, it's not even just the Palestinian people. Did you know that the ethnic cleansing, it goes further than that? We talk about the Ethiopian Jews. Yes, there are Ethiopian Jews that live there in Israel. Did you know that a couple years ago, they were sterilizing Ethiopian women against their will? So the women didn't know. They didn't know that the shots that they were giving them was sterilizing their bodies. Don't believe me? Look it up. Google it. Google it. Even The Guardian covered this. Now all of a sudden, everyone seems to forget. Everyone forgets about this. Jake Tapper, all these mainstream media commentators, everyone keeps talking about the Palestinians. Don't forget about what happened to the Ethiopian women. Now, why would they do that? Why would the state of Israel do that? Why would they do that? Again, to prevent the next generation. Now, tell me again. Tell me again. It has nothing to do with ethnic cleansing.
Several years after that, in 1954, was the Prevention of Infiltration Law that basically said that any refugee trying to return there was a shoot to kill order. They also talked about laying mines in the routes of returns for refugees. So this is an order that's still in place. Of course, the enemy has somewhat shifted. Of course, they shield themselves from being able to commit these crimes with Hamas, now that Hamas is governing the Gaza Strip. But this has always been a rule that's been in place since the foundation of Israel. And Israel itself is a state that is founded on top of indigenous land.
So that part right there is very important for people to hear and understand. Denying Palestinian people the right to return, that happened prior to the creation of Hamas. And I say this because I've heard people make that talking point. Well, the reason they don't let them return is because of Hamas. No. That was in place before the creation of Hamas. When they removed them from their homes, there was never a return. You could not come back. Imagine if that happened to you. Imagine, let's say you're from, I don't know, Texas, but let's say you move. Let's say you move to Canada, Montreal for a job or something. Imagine if you couldn't come back. Imagine if they told you, sorry, you're denied the right to return. You can't come back here, see your family or anything. Think about that.
It's an ongoing settler colonial project that has been continuing for 73 years. And every single day we see the settler colonial project continue to expand, continuing to annex the entire West Bank, continuing to throw people out of their homes in a violent fashion, and continuing to kill and imprison anyone that resists. And, I think this can all be summed up by something that's in place in East Jerusalem, which is called the demographic law, which essentially says that there needs to be a 70% majority Jewish population in East Jerusalem. So what does that mean? What does that mean if the percentage goes above 30%? Well, it means that you need to kick those people out, right? And commit ethnic cleansing to keep that artificial majority of the Jewish population. And essentially, that is what the foundation of Zionism is. It's an artificial majority that's imposed violently. And it means that in order to keep that majority, you need to expel or kill the indigenous population that is threatening that majority. This is a apartheid regime. This is a genocidal colonial occupation. And it's just quite fascinating that it's somehow been able to shroud itself in the notion that it's a progressive state and a democracy. It's quite the opposite. And you even see like founders of the state of Israel. I mean, the first prime minister, Ben Gurion, when you look at what his statements were during the foundation of Israel, he says, you know, we must expel the Arabs and take their places.
You hear this? That they must expel them and take their places. By the way, you can look up all of this on your own. Because I've read about the history of it, how it was established, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to be very clear about religion. Religion is a belief. It's a belief that an individual or a group has. Imagine if in the United States, our government created a law that said only Christians could live in the United States. Imagine if they did that and everyone had to leave. Everyone who wasn't Christian had to leave. Where do you go? Where do you go? You're not Christian? We're kicking you out. Think about that for a second. How many of you watching are not Christian, not religious at all? This is why we have something like separation of church and state in this country. But in the state of Israel, it's gone further than that. This is the point that Abby's trying to make when they talk about Zionism. Zionism is not Judaism. This is about Jewish nationalism. Now, what's funny to me is that the same people who sit up there and say that they despise Donald Trump because he supports nationalism. They said this when he was in office, right? And I don't support Trump either. But some of those same politicians support Zionism. Make it make sense. Everyone, homework assignment for this week, look on Open Secrets, and I want you to see. Look at whoever is politician that represents your district that's in Congress. Look up their donors. Look and see how many of them are in bed with AIPAC. We've already talked about Hakeem Jeffries and Richie Torres on the show. We know they are. Look how many of them are taking money from J Street or AIPAC. Look this up.
This was an explicitly articulated sentiment across pretty much every leader of Israel, no matter how progressive the United States depicts them. I mean, look at Levi Eshkol during the 1967 war. He said, if we don't give them enough water, maybe their orchards will wither and yellow. And I think that that's a policy that they've obviously continued in place in Gaza, where people do not have clean, potable water and haven't for some time. It's a completely untenable situation. It's unlivable. And it's atrocious that people who call themselves progressive can actually bend over backwards and make the mental gymnastics to excuse this and somehow pretend that you can be progressive, except for the case of Palestine.
I was looking at this poll from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, which surveyed Israeli youth, and it said that 66% of Orthodox youth, 42% of religious youth, and 24% of secular youth, quote unquote, hate Arabs, and 49% of religious youth and 23% of secular Israelis say they want to strip Palestinians of the right to vote. You guys at the Empire Files released a video called Everyday Israelis Express Support for Genocide, which the video kind of speaks for itself. I want to play a short clip for viewers. And by the way, these interviews were shot in a park called Tolerance Square in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. But here's the clip.
Let me pause here for just a second. So notice what he said about the Palestinians having the right to vote. This is another statement that RFK Jr. heavily pushes. He said they can vote, just ignoring like the dirty water and all these things that are happening to Palestinian people, but they can vote. Did you hear the poll that he just read? That the majority of people there don't want them to be able to vote. Now, this is a piece from Abby's documentary. Listen to this.
Also that every Arab that doing a terrorism attack, we have to kill him, and not because he's an Arab, because he's a terrorist. I think you should also kick out the family, because it all begins with chinuch. How you say
education. I don't think there's any answer to it. Really? There's only one way. Like, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it.
I think that we're miserable. The Arabs make a piguim, and we need to kill Arabs. No.
You guys hear this? Now, again, I ask you, why is it okay for them to say that, but it's not okay for you to have a protest to support the Palestinian people? Think about this, guys. You don't hear Bill Ackman talking about this. You don't hear RFK Jr. talking about this. And we'll finish up here.
Okay.
We'll talk about this later.
And how God punished is the sins by other people. He said, he sent the Nazis, he sent, and now he sent Palestinians.
And I mean, these clips are almost prophetic in the way they sort of predict what's happening right now in Jerusalem. And what really amazes me is how nonchalant these people are. I mean, you hear people in the US talk about, being liberal Zionists and, Zionism isn't racism, whatever, but everything we see coming out of Israel is just this ultra right-wing nationalism, and it doesn't really seem like anyone stands against it, or if they do, they're quiet about it, or they're being coerced into being silent. Is there any real opposition to this racism in Israeli society? And if so, how are anti-racist and left-wing groups perceived in Israel?
Well, even Bet Salem, which is a human rights organization that simply documents what's going on, is considered an enemy, right? The word leftist is actually a slur in Israeli society.
See?
And I think people have to wrap their minds around what even the notion of liberal Zionism means, right? It's kind of this pink-washed notion of what Zionism is at its core, which is a racist settler colonial state that mandates that millions of people are kept under colonial occupation, brutal occupation. And then, of course, there's Gaza, 2 million people caged in this open air prison. So the fact that liberal Zionists, they just kind of want to believe that they are progressive, but at the same time, they have to accept the reality of what Israel is. And they have to accept the reality of it's an exclusively Jewish state. What does that mean?
Right.
For the Arabs and the Palestinian population that live there? What's really the reality there is that there's this current of genocidal bloodlust throughout Israeli society. You can see this reflected in poll after poll. You can see it reflected in just the results of the elections, right? The vast majority of Israelis support the Likud government. They support Netanyahu. They support the ethnic cleansing. They support the ongoing massacres and atrocities carried out in Gaza. They support the ongoing occupation. And
So this is 2 years ago. If you want to watch this full video, it's called Palestine 101 with Abby Martin, Breakthrough News. This was 2 years ago. Again, guys. So she was warning people back then. She has a documentary there, Dan Cohen, like multiple people have made documentaries about what was happening to the Palestinian people there. But I do want to say this as well. Like you gotta really understand and grab this for what this really is. There have been so many lies that have been told. And I'm just like, guys, if you just do a little bit of research, some people don't want to because they don't want to piss off family members, or they don't want family members to become upset with them. Let's be real. Let's talk about it. Some people don't want to hear the truth because they know it's going to be painful to hear. And then there are some that do know the truth, but they just continue to deny it because it's easier to do that than to cope with reality. But not everybody feels this way. It's important that you know not everyone in the state of Israel agrees with what Netanyahu and the IDF are doing. Not everyone does. And for those people, and there's video footages of this as well, for those people that push back, that are Jewish and push back against the IDF assaults them too. We have to educate ourselves. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys. Thank you. That helps me out with the algo. Going to go to some of the comments here, and then I'll get to the one on Rockfin as well. Thank you for the super chat. None of your business. Love your work. Thank you. Thank you so much. JB says they're taking out the voice of the people. The U.S. supporting this means they don't believe in free speech. This explains why they persecuted Mumia Abu-Jamal and Julian Assange. Exactly. Thank you for the super chat, Sparky. Sabby, I found you in the last couple of years when I was on my boat fishing. I think that I searched Nico House or Jimmy Dore looking for a particular video of theirs. Interesting. The Oracle says independent in social media has interrupted the manufacture of consent and complicated the propagation of propaganda, i.e. narrative shaping and control. Colin says INN News reported of flying Palestinian flags are illegal with Brett Wilkins, journalist from Common Dreams, last fall. See, these are the things that people need to see, you know. Thank you for the super chat, Sarah. Love you, Sabby. You are appreciated more than you know. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sparky. I found you to be particularly telegenic, thoughtful, and insightful, so I subscribed. Thank you so much. Thank you for the super chat, Dijon. This war has united the Arab world with China, Iran, and Russia. Yes, it has. Yes, it has. We talked about on Friday that the U.S. government wants you to believe that Russia is isolated. Russia is not isolated. Russia has other friends. Thank you for the super chat, 007. If it were 1938, world would declare war on Israel? Ooh, that's a good point. Thank you, George. Between two geographically and political significant bodies of water, all humans will live in liberty. Bleep that, smart Alex. Teddy says, Sabby, will they start concealing the donor lists that are readily available online? I can see that coming. So you have to report your funding. Like that, they do have to do. Like that's required by the FEC. So I don't think they can take that away. Thank you for the super chat, Dijon. Long war, folks, as China and Russia share tech weapons with Iran. Thank you, Teddy. Thank you again, 007. The madder Sabby gets, the harder she hits the mouse. Poor mouse is getting a beat down tonight. Sorry, thought you needed a laugh. Tough subject today. This poor mouse. It's so loud too. Like when I click it, it's like, this is so loud. Thank you for the super chat, Penny. Does Tucker support freedom for Palestine? I don't know. That's a good question, Penny. And thank you, none of your business. Free speech as long as you don't talk. Bingo.